Okay, thank you very much.
Jim Purcell, everybody's seen his name in emails, and here he is in person.
Thank you. Yes, he has a face. So I don't know how many of you are aware that it's been 4 years since the last time the Manual of Style for Technical Publications was actually printed as an actual physical object. But it actually almost 5 years now. It was 1998. And we are now working on a new print edition, which is going to be coming out later this year. And so I just thought I would talk to you a little bit about what we're doing with MSTP, how it's going to be changing from the way it is today. And a lot of this is from your feedback, and I'm hoping today to get more of your feedback about the way you use MSTP, how the manual makes that possible or easy, and how it makes it difficult or impossible. How many people are going to WinWriters next month? Hands? Nobody? Wow. WinWriters is a conference that's held once a year for people who write Windows help, basically. And I'm going to be giving this presentation approximately next month at WinWriters, because we also want to get some feedback from people outside Microsoft who use the manual. And so, it's kind of a test run. But also, I do know that people inside Microsoft are interested, so I want to talk to you about what we're doing. And, okay, so that's what I'm going to do. So, I'm going to provide a little background on MSTP's history and talk some about why style matters, although I'm probably preaching to the choir in this particular group. Why we publish the style guide externally, and how people outside Microsoft as well as inside Microsoft can use it. Why we're updating it now, how these decisions get made. Contrary to popular belief, I don't just make it up as I go along. Well, sometimes, but and then I'm going to talk about what's new. Do a brief tour of an early prototype of the online version, which will give you some idea of the organization and strategy of the print version. And then, as I say, I want to talk about what you want to see and talk about your experiences with the manual and what would make them better. So, okay, first a little background. The manual has been around for maybe 10, 15 years. It started out as a kind of cross-project style sheet. And gradually, by and by, it grew. And was first published as a print book in 1995. The reason that they published it primarily was that it was getting published without Microsoft's involvement. Those of you who have been editors for a long time probably remember bootleg copies of the Microsoft Style Guide being circulated in like 4th generation Xeroxes all over the Puget Sound area, at least. And so, well, why not print it and make people pay for it? It worked out pretty well. It did so well, in fact, that they updated it again in 1998, and the second edition has actually sold more than 25,000 copies. So, which, is not a lot by some standards, but for a style guide, that's pretty good. So after that, there was a period there where the style guide kind of fell into neglect, and probably some of you remember that too. It wasn't updated. The stet alias was kind of not monitored very much, and there were some organizational reasons for that. But eventually, people figured out that it would really be a good thing to have a consistent style. And the things that oddly enough made that decision easier were search and Microsoft.com. Jim Alchin, I guess, was looking for something one day and couldn't figure out how to search for it because how you search for it depends on who wrote the article you're looking for. And he discovered that there was a lot of inconsistency in the way we use terminology. There's a lot of inconsistency just generally on MS-Com, and that just seemed like a bad thing. You know, it's not a good customer experience. And so in like late 2000, early 2001, CDDG proposed a content strategy and standards group, which was adopted, and I took this position in February of 2001. I know it seems like a long time to get to a print edition, but there's been a lot of things going on over there. But you know, when I came back, or when I took this position, and basically the lead editor position was revived, it meant that STET was monitored, MSTP was getting updated, and just generally style was becoming something that somebody in the company owned again, which I think most people would agree is a good thing, I hope. So why does style matter? Well, we know that consistency aids readability. If you use the same terms in the same way throughout your doc set, it's going to make it easier. And if we use the same terms in the same way across all the company doc sets, then that means that people don't have to relearn how to read our documentation every time they go to a new product. It also aids search, because if you know what the search term is in one place, then you know what the search term is going to be every place else if the term is used consistently. It also, having a company style guide, of course, saves you time, because you don't have to decide for yourself, is it click on, is it, you know, is drag and drop hyphenated, those sort of things. You know, you can just go to the style guide and you can focus the limited time you have to make editorial decisions on things that are specific to your product and your customers. The worldwide audience has become a really huge deal in the last 5 years. The second edition of MSTP has some guidance for globalization, but it's not extensive, and it's pretty thin. And in the last 5 years, we've learned a lot more about the global audience. We pay a lot more attention to the global audience. And so you know, we just need a lot more information about global content to get out to the editorial community. And that's one of the things we hope to do here. Company-wide policies can be integrated into a company style guide in a way that it's really hard to do with project style sheets. Branding is one thing. You know, we have the brand tool site now, which helps, but there are some general guidelines around brand that we also need to be aware of, and other company policies. There's the whole the Realizing Potential initiative that I think you're probably becoming aware of if you're not fully aware of it by now. And you know, it's a marketing initiative for sure, but it also affects how we write content. So those kind of things are important, not just to one group, but to the whole company. And it's always good for editors to learn from each other. And a lot of that learning goes, well, through my office. You know, people point out things that the manual says that we don't do anymore. People point out things in the manual that we still do, but they really don't make sense. And just people learn things that aren't in the manual that maybe ought to be. And so we can just get that information out to the company as a whole, and it doesn't have to just travel by word of mouth. Okay, so why we publish the style guide externally? Well, people use it. Technology professionals obviously use it. It's also a very popular book in technical editing courses in colleges. Judy Territz, I don't know how many of you know Judy Territz. She wrote a standard textbook on technical editing, and she came last year, I think, to talk here at Microsoft. And one of the things she told me was that the Manual of Style for Technical Publications out in the academic world is kind of looked on as the Chicago Manual of Style for Software, which, even though I didn't really have much to do with the second edition, I thought that was really a nice thing to say. And you know, we want to continue that, because that's a really, it's good for Microsoft. It builds awareness of Microsoft and the quality of our content, not just that Microsoft's a great software company, but that we write good content. It's just not a message we hear every day. And everybody needs a style guide. I mean, even small companies with 1 or 2 people need to start thinking about a style guide against the day when they grow to be larger, and they want to make sure that those style decisions are maintained consistently as the company grows. But not everyone has time to write one, especially an extensive one. So just as groups here in Microsoft can use MSTP as a basis for their style and then create a project style sheet that describes kind of unique things about your project, companies can do that too, and they frequently do. And it's always, it's a good customer experience for companies other than Microsoft. If they're using terminology the same way we are, then that gives their customers a consistent experience, and it gives them confidence that their company is really familiar with Windows technology and gives their documentation more credibility. And even people who aren't writing for Windows can use some of the basic approaches in MSTP, and to the extent that we can build a consistent customer experience across the industry, that can only be a good thing. So, the you here is not you. Okay, the you here is people who don't work here, who can use MSTP. They can use it as a primary, secondary reference, or as a starting point to write their own documentation guidelines, and they frequently do. So, this is all harder than it looks. There are a lot of challenges around doing a style guide for a company this size. A lot of departments, a lot of editors. Editors are seldom without opinions. And so, building a consensus is something that's important, because, I don't write your review. And part of your review goals are probably not to be conformant to MSTP. So it has to make sense to you so that you'll use it. And so getting to style guidelines that do make sense to everybody, and people can see the reason for them, even if they don't always agree with the decision, but they can say, yeah, well, consistency is more important than me being more right than everybody else. Is a good thing. The expanded reach of MSTP means we have a lot more stakeholders. Because MSTP is basically being revived because of search and Microsoft.com, it means that where in the past the main audience for MSTP was user ed groups, now it's user ed groups and program managers and marketing people and website managers. There are just a lot more people, even within Microsoft, who are using it, and so it has to be responsive to their needs as well. So that's kind of a challenge. And evolution is always, things are always changing. We learn what works and what doesn't, and that causes us to change the way we write. Industry standards and terminology changes, and we want to keep up with that. There are new products that we come up with that have their own terminology. We have new technologies, like .NET is a big change in the last couple of years, and I think the full impact of the changes driven by .NET are really not yet felt throughout the company, but they will be. And to the extent that the company style guide can make writing about these new technologies less dramatic, that will help everybody. So how do we decide stuff? Well, there's the editorial style board, which is made up of 7 or 8 of the most senior editors and localizers and terminologists in the company. And for this revision of the style guide, we've also created a larger stakeholder group. That's, I think, 17 people right now, who are going to be reviewing the print edition of MSTP to make sure that it reflects what's going on in their groups, so that we're not just working with the major groups in the company. We've got a lot of people from some of the smaller groups, and also people who have more specialized areas of expertise, such as accessibility or localization or mobile computing, those sort of things that are not necessarily fully reflected in the makeup of the ed board. I get bug reports. People send me mail every day saying, it says in MSTP in this topic that you should do this, but over here it says you shouldn't do that, and what's its story? So I get a lot of those kind of questions, as well as things like typos or suggested new topics, and it's kind of a job to keep up with them. But that doesn't mean I don't want them. So if you find problems with MSTP, be sure and let me know. But that's one of the ways that we make editorial decisions is when I get those things, if it's like an inconsistency, I go to the ed board and say, so what are we really doing out there? You can look in the documentation and talk to the people who are doing the work and find out what we really do, and then make those corrections so that going forward MSTP gets more and more consistent with itself and with what we do as a company. Then you have the emerging terminology thing. We have a U.S. terminologist, Robin Lombard. I don't know how many of you know Robin. But Robin is the main focal point now for terminology issues. What I focus on with terminology is usage. But as far as what term do we use, what does it mean, Robin does that. And then it's like, when do you use it and how do you use it? That's kind of what I do. But we look at terminology that comes out of marketing. We look at terminology that comes out of the industry. We get feedback from the global audience about what terms work for them and what terms are confusing and what terms are offensive that we would never have guessed. So there are a lot of things there that we have to look at and then make decisions there, working with the terminologists and the ed board and other people in the company. We get feedback from usability. Up to now, this has not been a big thing for MSTP, but we do know that we have good usability data about things that work and things that don't, and we try to use that. And we're also working much more closely now with the accessibility group, so that we can accommodate people who have disabilities, and make sure that the way we talk about our technology makes sense to them. So, why an update? I guess I pretty much answered this by now. There's a lot of things have changed. A lot more people are using MSTP. We've learned a lot more about our customers and about people's experience using the manual. And the computing world has changed. There are a lot of topics that the last edition of MSTP really did not address, or at least did not address very much. The internet was a pretty new thing. Mobile computing really didn't exist. The worldwide audience was something that we had, but we paid a little bit of attention to it, but not a lot. Basically, we were thinking more about localizers than people who were reading our content in English, for whom English was not necessarily their first language. And we now have XML and content management system, and that's changing the way people develop content. And so, and with the internet too. I mean, it's not just that the internet exists, but that we use it a lot more, and a lot more of our content is published on the internet rather than in print or rather than on CDs. So all of those things, affect style, and all of those are reasons why. Well, let me just ask: how many people have this book on their shelf? How many people use this book as opposed to the chum that goes out? Not so many, yeah.
It's hard to get a hold of.
It's out of print, that's why.
It's hard to even get a hold of used. I think that's a testament to its popularity.
Yes.
When I was working outside the company, I couldn't find a copy.
Yes, and actually I did see on Amazon.com that used copies of MSTP are selling for like $200 and $300. So if you have a mint copy. But we recently put MSTP up on the web as a free download because it's out of print, and we do want to keep people aware of it and using it so that when the new one comes out, they'll be excited about it. So we put it up on the web as a free download, and I understand it's doing pretty well as a download. I have not looked lately on Amazon to see if we have put a hole in the price of the print copies. But I mean, a lot of people do like a print version, and so whether they like it $200 worth, I don't know. But it's expensive. And these things are like $25 new, is that right? $29 new. So what we're doing, we've changed the organization a lot. One of the most constant bits of feedback I get, both inside and outside Microsoft, is, all those general topics that are interleaved alphabetically with the usage guidance, we can't find them because we don't know how they're organized. Some of them are easy, like capitalization is under C. Well, that's great. But some not so much. And so we're taking those and making them into a more of a chapter and section organization, which should make things a lot easier to find. The usage topics where we just say, how to use, etc. or something, those are still going to be alphabetical, but they will just be one section of the manual now. We're going to have a lot more explanation of usage guidance, so that, one of the common questions I get from people just in email is, why do we do it that way? I don't get it. And sometimes the answer is, well, there are any number of ways that are correct, but for consistency's sake, we had to choose one, and that's the one we chose. But sometimes, the answer requires like an explanation of, in terms of grammar or rhetoric, of why one thing is better than another for our audience. And so a little bit of that, it's not going to turn into like this big, a whole big grammar text or anything like that. But there's going to be more explanation than heretofore. And I think you've already probably seen that in some of the revised topics in the CHUM, as the CHUM has been updated over the last year or so. And we're going to have more coverage or new coverage of a number of other topics like these here. This last one I want to talk about a little bit, especially because one of the things that in my background at Microsoft, which is primarily in developer documentation and somewhat in IT pro documentation, is that MSTP has done a great job of telling us how to write to end users, to home users and information workers. But if you're writing for programmers, there's a lot of stuff in there that you just say, if I did that, my audience would throw this manual back at me, And so we're going to try to be a little more responsive to those audiences. And if anybody has any particular suggestions about that, I'm all ears. So the new organization, on the left here you see the existing organization, which I think you're all familiar with. And on the right, this is, at this point, an early prototype, but this is essentially what we're looking to do. And these titles will no doubt change. But we want to align things a little more so that, related topics are close to each other. All the grammatical topics. There's a lot of topics in the manual right now on verbs, but they're all over the place. And one thing I discovered when I started pulling these topics together was that there were more of them than there need to be. For instance, voice. We had a topic called voice. We had a topic called active voice versus passive voice. We had a topic called passive voice. Well, they're all saying the same thing. And we really only need one. And similarly with mood, there was a topic on subjunctive mood, and then there was a topic on imperative mood, and so just pulling those together. Let me just ask one question about that, by the way. Right now this is kind of organized using kind of technical grammatical terms. Do you think that's okay? Is that a bad thing? Well, golly, that's a good one.
In the online version, you might be able to have multiple ways of displaying this information.
Uh-huh.
This is all XML driven and based, and you know, if you want everything alphabetized, I'm sure you could do that. If you want to group like things together, all grammar things, how they display, maybe all things that are related to documenting programming languages, you could group those that way. Obviously, you can't do that in the print.
Right.
Because you get one shot at it.
Right. Yeah. I guess my question is, you know, when you see this and, you know, you see topics on voice and mood and tense and gerunds, does that sound a little too school-like, or, yeah? Yeah. Well, I guess there are two things there, right? I mean, because you can have a topic on anthropomorphism that gives you general guidelines about what you shouldn't do. And you can also have a topic in the alphabetical usage guide on behave that says, you know, when and how it's okay to use behave and when not. Right. Yes, and there's still full text search. And there's still an index. In fact, Press is going to give a professional indexer the job of indexing this. Yeah.
How much are you going to cover standard English language versus we assume people have grammar books and you're just documenting each time?
Very little, actually, or as little as I can get away with, because it's not an English text. You know, we assume that you guys are professional editors or people who buy this in school are you know, getting an education in writing and editing, and so therefore somewhere along the line they learn some grammar and rhetoric. What we're going to focus on here are questions that I get every day, or things that we know that writers and editors have trouble with because they're always getting corrected and recorrected. So things like that where there are problems, you know, like anthropomorphism, like parallelism, those sort of things we will talk about in the manual. But general grammar and rhetoric, no, we won't, because we hope you know that already. Or you know where to find out about it if you don't. Yeah, Pim. Oh. Yeah. Right. But I mean, it's important for those to talk about, you know, in terms of Microsoft company style. You know, I mean, everybody says, you know, the active voice should dominate, the indicative mood should dominate, and that sort of thing. And we're going to say that too. But we just want to say as a matter of Microsoft style, because I know that we get, especially when we get new writers that come in from college, you know, and they're most familiar with reading textbooks. And so they want to write everything in the third person passive voice, you know, and we want to discourage that. So, yeah.
Just said that you assume a certain amount of training
Mm-hmm.
in the field, but that makes clear to me that using the technical terms in the material makes most sense, because I would think the primary audience for this book is editors, and you'll get to know this like the back of our hand, the way we did with the MSTP and MSTG back and forth, and other people, there is search. And hopefully search will be really robust.
Yeah. Okay, great. So let's see. More explanation. On the left is the entry for etc. in the second edition. And it's correct. It says what our style guidance was at that time. But it doesn't really tell you much that you need to be a little more effective writer. So we beefed it up a little bit and changed the guidance. And these are actually from the current MSTP that's on the web right now. And we tell people basically don't use etc. It's a foreign phrase, and if you're really limited for space, okay, but try not to do it. And over here we said, well, use and so on instead. But it turns out and so on is really not that great either. So, you know, we're just kind of telling people now, avoid and so on, except in certain situations, and here are some ways to write around it. Make sense? So, and you've probably seen a lot more of that kind of guidance finding its way into the manual already, and so there will be more of that. Okay, so let's take a look at the manual here. I have this is really a prototype, okay. But I just want you to see, and already I've changed some of these topics from when I did that earlier slide. But we've got, down here at the bottom, we still got the usage dictionary and the acronyms, okay? But all this stuff above is, for the most part, pulled out of the alphabetical reference, plus some new topics that we know we have to add. So, for instance, then under the grammatical elements here, well, let's look at voice. So, I tried to explain a little bit more about what active and passive voice are, and to give you some guidance as to when it's okay to use passive voice, for instance. But our guidance is still the same. It's still active voice should predominate. Don't use passive voice except in certain situations. And the same with mood. We had a lot of topics on mood, and now we just have one. So, and then these kind of rhetorical things, I've moved those down to effective writing, which this topic will probably, or this heading will probably change again because I don't like that very much. But these are kind of basic style things that we want to get across. That they're not really grammar, and they're not like down here under common style problem. This is like Microsoft corporate style, how you format dates, how you format time zones, and this sort of thing. And so forth. Content formatting and layout. It turns out that this section and this one down here, the user interface, are the most used by people outside Microsoft. In fact, the screen terminology section, oops, no illos. Well, the screen terminology section is without question the most used topic outside of Microsoft in MSTP. Surprised me. And all the pictures in there are still Windows 95 screenshots, so.
I'm not seeing the list, and maybe I'm not seeing it because document conventions, the total right to choose so much. What gets bold? What gets italics?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, as I say, this is not a complete thing here. But yeah, document conventions, I mean, they're kind of in here in the content formatting and layout. We have like headings, hyperlinks, cross-references.
Like a quick reference for a writer to just look at a table and say, oh, okay, it's a command, it's bullet.
You mean like just something that there's a topic that says the following things are in bold type, the following things are in italic type, that sort of thing?
Actually, it's like a listing of different elements. You use like a dialog box. Look at what's on
Yeah, yeah. In the user interface, we have,
okay.
yeah.
But it's not exactly in the table anymore, but it's more there.
Oh, yeah, we still have the table.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But that
No, it's still there.
That doesn't have a developer.
Sorry? Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, if it was there before, it's still there. At least right now. Because those sections haven't really changed yet. So then we have a section on Microsoft-specific issues down here, which are things like code names and using Microsoft and product names, things that we want to make sure that we know internally, but this may not necessarily be published externally. One of the beauties of XML is that you can mark content as internal only, and then it won't go to the print version. So this is basically what we're doing. And I'd be happy to scroll around some more if you think that's helpful. But I think you get the idea. Yeah?
I'd love to see an example of how the new MSTP has taken our global audience.
Okay, well, there's a couple of things, and I'm not sure I can show them to you in this prototype. We do have a section, where is it, on global content here. Oh, go. Okay, global content. That has our current globalization guidelines and other topics of interest to people writing for the global audience. Also, in other topics throughout the manual, these topics here and also the usage topics, when a topic has some relevance to the global audience, like we say don't use this word even though everyone knows it's a perfectly fine word, we'll say don't use it because people who read English as a second language have trouble with it, that sort of thing. So we'll have a lot more of that kind of guidance that's specific to individual topics as to when globalization is an influence on the way we provide guidance. Yeah? Yes. Yes, yes. Yeah, things like that. Things like, don't use flags. There's something about, I think you're not supposed to use hands because hands have, just about any position you can put a hand in is offensive somewhere in the world. So you basically don't want to use, illustrations of people's hands, signing something. The little pointer? I don't know. Yeah. Somebody ought to talk to those Windows people.
Will you be including polycheck database?
No, we will not. Internally, we provide links to that stuff. Externally, it's beyond the scope of this document to do that. And, so I'm kind of hoping to have some kind of general guidance, and if there's a website that we can direct people to that offers some information, then we'll do that probably. But no, as far as like large databases like Polycheck and the GPS web and that sort of thing, we're not going to try to duplicate what they have. It's just way more than this manual can carry, I think.
How are you proposing to address a developer audience versus an end user?
Mainly it has to do with terminology. But it also has to do with just tone, I think, a lot of times. Home users in particular, they're not comfortable with computers a lot of times, and so we tend to write to them in ways that make them feel comfortable with something that we know they're not comfortable with. But developers and IT pros, they're pretty much committed to technology, and we don't have to make them feel like technology is their friend because they've already bought in. We can be more direct in many cases.
So how will you address that in the...
Oh, sorry. How will we address it in the guide? Well, we have a section down here which is totally not fleshed out. Maybe I didn't put it in this. But there's a section down here somewhere on writing for the developer. I guess it's not in here. But it will be.
A follow-up to that, one of the places we look for information about that is the acronyms table, which term you spell out, which one you don't.
Right.
So if you're going to retain that, there's a lot of terms that it says, when you say that currently you should spell out, which we decided not to do because we were...
Yes. Well, I know the acronym table is kind of out of date. And we're a little bit conflicted on what to do with the acronym table going forward, just because it's hard to keep it up to date. And like right now, Robin is working on a terminology glossary, a database of terms and definitions. We have talked about doing a similar thing for acronyms, but we don't have the resources to do it right now. But it's something we would really like to do in the future. But it's something we haven't quite decided yet what we're going to do with the acronym table for this edition. But
Maybe at the very least you could consider including a list of acronyms that we don't have to spell out for developers.
Yeah.
Make it more comprehensive.
Sure.
In one place.
yeah. Okay.
There might be two ways to handle that. One, to have a table similar to the way it is, and have a column for home users, developers, and say it's not necessary to spell out in the developer audience. But the other thing is maybe it doesn't exist at all in the MSTP hard copy, but it's an internal website that we maintain that is just linked to from here, and then it's somebody else is updating it.
Yeah, and we're giving a lot of thought too to what we will put up on the web when this is released. We may just put the whole book on the web as a website, pretty much the way we have the internal one now, although I hope a little webbier. But in a way that people can look at it and realize that it's a good reference, that they might want to have the print copy so that they can browse a little more easily in. And another thing is stuff like keeping it up to date and adding things like acronyms. If we do get an acronym database, we could put that up on the web also, and it'd be available internally and externally. I think that would be really great. Yeah.
I think you've heard, and you've already answered this. What's your deadline with press?
My deadline with press. My deadline with press is mid-May. Actually, that's on a subsequent slide here. We'll just move right along. Okay. The manuals is going to ship in September, and in order for that to happen, I have to hand it off in mid-May. Well, actually, it will ship before September, but it will be in bookstores in September. It'll be in the channel in August, probably. But the final handoff will be in mid-May, and when we have the final with all the copy edits and the index and everything, and it's finished, then we will put it up on the internal web, and that will be the current version of MSTP that you can use inside Microsoft. And then when it ships, then the rest of the world can use it too. And when it ships, then you can go to MS Market and get a print copy. Yeah.
I have a question about how you're making decisions on your book's audience. For example, you have, in a way, two audiences.
Oh, more than two.
You have an audience, and it's a huge internal audience.
Yes.
And then you have an external audience.
Yes.
You have an paying audience, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, when a decision has to be made, is it going to be made in favor of the internal audience or the paying audience?
Well, the current MSTP print edition made almost no allowance for the external audience at all. In fact, I'm not sure it made any allowance. So there's a lot of stuff in there that external people don't get, especially stuff around trademarks and legal issues. The print edition this time will be a little more targeted toward the external audience, at least to the extent that we will remove stuff that doesn't interest them or that we don't want them to see. And we will probably kind of take a slightly different approach on some topics with the external audience than we would internally. But mainly, I mean, this is the Microsoft Corporate Style Guide. And we're not going to offer them completely different guidance to the external audience. We just might not tell them everything we tell you.
For example, if I had, let's say it's December of 2003, and I'm looking at the website, and I got the website copy and everything, and a paper copy next to me. I will look at sections, and they will actually have they will have different content, because you made a decision that this is how we want the outside audience to see it, and this is how we want the inside audience.
The differences that you're most likely to see is that internally we will point you to an internal website, especially like things like legal. You know, in the external version, we'll probably have some kind of general, you know, talk to your legal department, you know, honor people's trademarks, don't get yourself sued. And internally, we will point you to LCA Web, where we have our trademark lists and our trademark guidelines and everything that our lawyers tell us that we have to do.
And we can tell outsiders what we expect them to do with our terminology.
That's a good question. We did that in the last version, and it was not universally well received. Some people felt like we were trying to dictate policy to them. And I know that one of the things that you have to do to protect your trademarks as intellectual property is you have to educate third parties on how to use them, and this seems like a good way to do that. We do have on the web the trademark website, MS Comwac Trademarks, that has a lot of the same content that's on Brand Tools. And most likely what we will do in that regard is just point people to our website, because the website will be more current and it will be kept up to date, whereas this will be out of date by the time it ships, because that's the nature of print, right? Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so what a lovely color. It was blue when I did it. So my email address is jimpur. Yeah, you know where I live. If you have any questions or suggestions, or you find bugs, send me mail. You know, I read it, I answer as much of it as I can, which is most of it. And I appreciate, you know, knowing that people are using my work, and you know, when you have problems, I want to know so that you won't have them in the future. Gene.
The web, actually, and email. We now have established an email forum for having lots of discussion and information together.
Sorry, we have what?
Yes, that, the alias.
Yes.
A lot of the interchange around evolving editorial policy happens through email. I'm wondering if at any time soon we can see a web form, say, for example, where we can submit topic ideas to you for inclusion in the style guide, or where we can have web-based thread discussions happen outside of email.
Wouldn't that be great?
I think it would be better than keeping track of all this email.
Yeah, well, and it would. You know, I do not have web expertise, and I don't have access to a web expert on my team. So I'm pretty much limited to what I can do and what I can get people to do for me. So if anyone wants to volunteer, you know, for stuff like that, because, you know, I really would like to make the editorial standards website more useful to everybody. It's just not an area where I know a lot about how to go about doing it. You know, I think like a forum to suggest things is great. I don't know how to make one.
Just in general, are there going to be a lot of things that will be changing, like email dropping the hyphen, or things that have evolved? Or
Email's not dropping the hyphen, no.
Web with the lowercase,
No, web is still uppercase. Basically, those kind of changes you should be seeing all along. You know, I mean, just in like the general periodic updates to MSTP internally. I don't think that the print edition is going to like suddenly radically change everything we're doing internally, because, you know, what we're doing basically works. You know, we're going to have more guidance, and some of the guidance is going to be different, but that's just because it's evolving anyway. So.
Would it be out of line to ask for a section that maybe says what's changed or what's been dropped or deleted, or things that have, you know, topics that have substantially changed that have been maybe very controversial? So, and maybe this is just in the online version, but so that the editors maybe can go through and say, "Whoa, I didn't realize this, and I'm doing this wrong."
If you look now in the website, there is a topic there that's new and revised and deleted topics. And every time I update the manual and put it back up on the web, I update that topic. Now, for the new version, Oh, golly. A lot is going to be different. I mean, the whole organization is going to be different. And so I haven't quite decided what to do about that for the print edition, because it's going to be so different. And people are just going to expect it to all be different because the world has moved on in 5 years. But internally, we will certainly always have that page that says, you know, since the last major update, this stuff has changed, and since the last minor update, this other stuff has changed.
Are you going to put the software version out to the others for beta testing?
Yes. Not this one you're seeing here, but when we have a version that's pretty much complete, that will be probably the next update that goes out on the web. Okay, well, thank you very much.
That thing Jean said about the